This morning, a file appeared on Jake Reed's desktop that changed everything. A scanned certificate tying a child to a man she had never met. It was impossible and immediate. A small rectangle of paper with bold letters that smelled of printer ink and office coffee when Jake hovered his hand over the screen as if sensing it physically. He blinked, the hum of servers in the basement like a heartbeat, and realized the certificate was only the surface of a code someone had buried in a company's archive. He had 60 seconds to prove something everyone else said could not be true. The man in the document was Oliver Hawthorne, the CEO of Hawthorne Global, and the child named on the paper, Lily, lay in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and warm peaches, waiting for a donor. Jake had no title, no fortune, and no reason to be involved, but his hands were steady and his fingers knew patterns other people missed. If he failed, reputations would crumble and a life might be lost. If he succeeded, he would expose a secret that would topple pride and build a new kind of justice. He tapped the keyboard and did not look away. Who would believe that a junior analyst could outsmart 1,000 experts and find the key that every boardroom had missed? Stay with me and watch how a single minute opened a locked world, and how that unlock led to a fight for a child, a family torn, corporate ruin, and finally, a chance to heal. Jake Reed grew up inside the narrow margins of an industrial town, the son of a mechanic and a school librarian, learning to take apart radios and put them back together until the pieces made sense. He left for the city with a scholarship and a battered laptop and spent years refining a quiet skill set: pattern recognition, code intuition, and the stubborn refusal to accept the line that said, "This is how things are." He once spent an entire winter rebuilding a neighbor's generator because the neighborhood had lost power, and someone had to keep the fridge working for the people who could not afford to throw food away. Those nights of grease on his hands and the smell of hot metal taught him to look for small clues where others saw failure. In college, he worked 3 jobs, tutored math to pay for classes, and stayed up late parsing algorithms because to him, a sequence was a promise of order. He cared for his younger sister after their mother fell ill, learning hospital corridors and medication schedules, swallowing the helplessness of being young and responsible. Those debts of love and the memory of small hands squeezing his in fear turned into something else, a fierce clarity that a life could be saved with skill and stubbornness. The scholarship, the long commutes, the nights fixing broken things, and the days being ignored taught Jake to move quietly until a moment demanded he be loud. When he found the certificate, he felt the old urgency rise, a private history of keeping things from collapsing. Oliver Hawthorne sat in a glass office on the 50th floor and believed in 2 absolutes: control and legacy. Born into strategic marriages and deal-making, he learned to treat people as variables and outcomes. He built Hawthorne Global by making comfortable choices for powerful clients and by silencing those who threatened his narrative. He loved the image of a man who never made mistakes and who never let sentiment dictate policy. Underneath the tailored suits and fine cologne, he carried a childhood of calculated omissions, a father who taught that emotion was a vulnerability, and a mother who kept ledgers instead of hugs. Oliver kept secrets the way some men keep watches, wearing them as proof of worth. Yet there was one person who had, once, asymmetrically scratched at that facade: Eleanor Hawthorne, his sister, and the matriarch of the family, a woman with a razor mind and a colder palate for mercy. She never forgave error and never hesitated to use family power as punishment. She is the antagonist whose voice is law in the household, whose threat to disinherit or exile carries the weight of empire. Opposing her, allies like Marcus Lee, the corporate counsel, and Julia Bennett, a hungry reporter, played chess pieces with shifting loyalties. Rachel Kim, a former cybersecurity lead fired by Oliver, became Jake's unlikely ally, bringing both rueful knowledge of the company's archives and a moral wound that matched his. Each of these people carries backstory and scars. Marcus as a lawyer who once compromised his ethics to save a career. Julia as a journalist whose father lost everything to a scandal. Rachel as a technologist who watched her work be weaponized. They are close enough to the center to hurt and far enough to still choose to help. And their motives are complicated by fear and the instinct to survive. Together, these lives create pressure in a world that values power over truth. The first scene opens in IT at Hawthorne Global. Fluorescent lights buzzing, coffee cooling in a chipped mug, Jake hunched at a bank of monitors. Dialogue quickly layers like breath in cold air. "You seeing this, Jake?" says Rachel, leaning over his shoulder, the perfume of travel soap lingering on her coat. Jake replies, "This certificate is scanned into a folder dated 6 years ago, but the metadata is clean. Someone altered the timestamps." Rachel rubs her temple and asks, "So you think it's forged?" Jake taps keys, the mechanical click a small drumbeat. "Either forged or encoded. The file structure has a pattern that is not random. Someone hid a hash in the margins." Rachel leans closer, fingers brushing the screen, the hum of the AC like a low ocean. "If Oliver's name is on it and it links to Lily, that could be huge." Jake's breath comes out slow. "Or ruinous. We need
To be sure. The fluorescent buzz, the smell of stale coffee, and the hum of a nearby printer create a sensory map, light reflecting off the monitors, the scrape of a chair, the distant clang of a courier's cart. This opening scene contains a minimum of 10 exchanges, each pulling the reader toward the dilemmatic heart of the plot. Jake contacts Dr. Maya Santos at St. Agnes Pediatrics to verify Lily's status, and their conversation carries the metallic scent of hospital corridors. "Her condition is worsening," Maya says, eyes tired and warm, her voice tinged with the clink of plastic instruments in the background. "We have a window for a marrow transplant, but no matched donor." Jake swallows. "Is there anything a private test can do that the registry missed?" Maya considers the sterile air, the faint smell of antiseptic and lemon from the cleaning cart, and replies, "We can run extended HLA typing and a more comprehensive cross-check, but time is a luxury." They talk about probability, risk, and the cold arithmetic of matching antigens. In the exchange, Marcus Lee offers legal counsel on custody and hospital consent, his words like polished stone. "If Hawthorne's name is on that certificate, we need DNA authorization and chain of custody, and fast." The scene emphasizes sound of foot traffic, the click of pen caps, and the muted television playing a daytime show down the hall. This is the first major pivot, introducing medicine as both hope and a timetable. Back at home, Eleanor Hawthorne receives a truncated and dramatic phone call, and the story tightens into family pressure. The line crackles with the leather-soft voice of Eleanor. Someone leaked something about Lily. Her domestic voice has the crispness of starched linen. If this is true, Oliver will be exposed. Oliver, in a private moment, hears his sister's suspicion as if a physical slap, the air in his office thickening with leather-scented cologne and the copper taste of panic. "We will buy time," he says to Marcus, "or bury it entirely." Marcus replies in even cadence, "You risk shareholder confidence. There is a clause in the bylaws about public scandal and succession." Eleanor's words fall like polished stones. Discrediting the certificate will protect the company and the family. Discrediting the child will be more complicated. The pressure of family disapproval is not only emotional, but tactical. The matriarch frames the problem in terms of reputation, threats to succession, and the possibility of disinheritance for those who deviate. The hospital becomes a place of precise smells and quiet urgency as Jake spends hours watching Lily, a small girl with a laundry list of tubes and a stubborn laugh that pierces solemnity. "She likes daisies," Nurse Tomas Rivera says, his Spanish accent soft over the beep of monitors. She names her cartoons and corrects the doctors when they say too much. Dr. Maya explains HLA loci to Jake with gentle clarity, turning technical description into immediate stakes. "We need a 10 out of 10 match on HLA to minimize graft rejection." The registries searched tens of thousands, still no match. Sometimes family members are the only answer. Jake thinks of genetic privacy, of names hidden in company ledgers, and of a certificate that might be both a lie and a clue. Anna Park, a social worker, brings a photo and the smell of lemon sanitizer.
"This is Lily's mother, Naomi," she says. "She signed everything in a rush, exhausted and proud. The paperwork was accepted by a registrar overseas." The idea that paperwork might be manipulated sets a tension between bureaucratic inertia and human life. A public scandal erupts when Julia Bennett publishes the first article, a short, pounding piece that sets social feeds alight. Hawthorne Global linked to unexpected parenthood. Within hours, stock tickers stammer, the office phones ring like a chorus, and the sound of notification pings becomes a new thunder. On morning panels, the host asks, "How could a certificate surface now?" And pundits, smelling blood, speculate about infidelity, corporate intrigue, and cover-ups. Oliver watches market cones and red numbers cascade across his screen with the taste of bile. "This will not stand," he says, but his voice leaks worry. Media phones start appearing outside Lily's hospital window. Flashbulbs create a staccato rain on the glass. Julia stands firm, but someone posts a doctored video accusing her of fabricating evidence. But public square becomes a battlefield of narrative control, memes, and sympathetic fundraisers spawning simultaneously. The social reactions are tactile: the vibration of phones in pockets, the cold touch of a tablet screen, the metallic ring of a newsroom line that would not stop. Jake and Rachel begin an investigation into Hawthorne Global's archives. The scene is a low-lit data center, the air cool and dry, the whirring of fans like a distant highway. Their exchange demonstrates technique and trust. "There are access logs that show a transfer at 2:15 a.m., Rachel says, tapping a printout. Her breath fogs the light above. Jake replies, "That is outside normal hours. Someone with after-hours clearance or someone spoofing credentials." They set up Juno, a sandbox that mirrors the company network. "Run a checksum across the scanned certificates and map the entropy," Jake instructs, his fingers moving like a pianist. He narrates aloud as if to keep the stress at bay. "If the embedded hash correlates with an employee key that no longer exists, then we can trace the key owner." Rachel nods, eyes bright with the smell of recycled air. "And if the owner is someone fired, we have motive." Marcus Lee calls with a legal note of reproach. "Careful, you two, you could be in violation of privacy statutes." Jake answers, "We are trying to save a life and prove a truth, Marcus." The center of the company is a maze of fluorescent corridors and soft carpet that muffles footsteps, until someone arrives with bad news. At roughly 1/3 into the narrative, the emotional intensity is high. And the audience is invited to respond. If you were in the protagonist's shoes, what would you do? Would you risk exposing a powerful family to save a child? Or would you protect a fragile trust and let institutions decide? Write in the comments, "I would fight," or "I would wait," and explain why. Your perspective matters here. Share one short sentence about whether you think secrets should be exposed when a life depends on it. The best comments will be featured in a future episode where we talk to families, doctors, and legal experts about difficult ethical choices. Hearing your experiences helps others understand the stakes and builds a community of people who want stories that push toward justice and healing. Now back to the story. Because while you write those lines, Jake will keep tapping keys and Lily will keep breathing in a bed under a lamp that hums like a halo. The investigation yields an unexpected lead. Detective Sam Ortiz arrives with a warrant and the smell of rain on his coat. "We have an IP trail that points to an offshore registrar," he says in a low voice. "There are shell companies and a registrar in a jurisdiction with loose oversight." Julia pushes. "If a certificate is created offshore, can it be used domestically?" Sam replies, "Legally, it can be problematic, but practically, yes. Registrars often accept foreign documents without deep checks." The conversation spirals into technical and legalese that becomes urgent human drama. Marcus warns about injunctions, while Anna argues that bureaucracy is killing a child. "Paperwork will not keep Lily alive," she says. The phrase like a small match struck in the dark. The sensory field includes the echo of Sam's shoes on marble, the soft rattle of his keys, and the distant squeal of a subway. Tension Moment 1, expanded and visceral, focuses on Jake alone in a nighttime corridor, counting seconds as servers spin up. He remembers his mother in a hospital bed and the powerless feeling of being too young to help. He feels the weight of being judged by people with titles. He considers quitting, not because he is tired of work, but because he is afraid of becoming the cause of more harm. He sits on a bench, the wood cool under his palms, and the air smelling faintly of ozone. Memories of his sister whisper through his head, small hands and small crimes of childhood. He breathes, the sound loud, and realizes that action is the only antidote to guilt. He stands, the floor cold under his toes, and walks to the server room with renewed purpose. That scene examines a private choice and the memory that shapes it, stretching the suspense into an internal battle that culminates in decisive motion. A cyber attack interrupts the investigation, timed to discredit the very trail Jake is following. Anonymous code floods Julia's inbox, doctored files cascade, and a deepfake video appears showing Jake admitting to planting evidence. The office smells like burnt toast as someone microwaves food in a break area, and the hum of denial servers becomes a roar. Rachel curses, fingers flying. They are trying to smoke us out, inject doubt. Jake answers, calm but strained. We have backups and air-gapped copies. Move everything offline. 10 exchanges show strategy, frustration, and resolve. The attack suggests a professional hand, possibly someone inside the corporate firewall. Jake's detective instincts flare. Someone who could create a deepfake and mimic his keystrokes must be close to the center of power. The scene is sensory, with the flicker of monitors, the tinny ring of a distant television, and the taste of stale coffee that now feels like panic. Technical process note on DNA testing and chain of custody in clear terms. A paternity DNA test samples cheek cells using sterile swabs, then amplifies specific short tandem repeat markers via polymerase chain reaction, comparing alleles across loci to calculate a probability of paternity. Chain of custody requires signed logs, sealed transports, and laboratory accreditation to ensure that samples are not swapped or contaminated. For bone marrow compatibility, extended HLA typing evaluates multiple loci such as HLA-A, B, C, DRB1, and DQB1 for best match. These procedures are sensitive, standardized, and documented to be admissible in legal or medical decisions. The boardroom explodes into a spectacle when a leaked internal memo surfaces, suggesting a buyback to contain the stock plummet. Eleanor appears on camera to issue a statement, while her words skim like ice. "We will act in the interest of shareholders and our family," she says, carefully controlled. A rival, Elias Trent, smells opportunity and initiates a quiet takeover bid, his voice a velvet blade. "We can stabilize the shares and install competent leadership," he tells a group of investors in a room smelling of cologne and polished wood. Oliver fights to contain both the market panic and the family implosion. At the same time, community fundraisers for Lily flood social media, a counterpoint of compassion. "Someone made a GoFundMe and it has thousands," Anna tells Jake, her voice carrying the warmth of hospital coffee and the brittle hope of a mother. The narrative tension spikes as corporate maneuvers collide with human pleas. Moment of tension 2 centers on a hearing where Marcus argues to seal Lily's records to protect privacy, while Julia pushes to unseal them in the public interest. The courtroom is warm with the smell of old paper and the scratch of pens. Marcus's voice is slow and legal. Sealing these records is in the best interest of a minor and avoids additional trauma. Julia counters sharply. "Trauma is happening now. Transparency could produce a donor, lead to answers, and save a life." The judge's gavel hits like a small thunderclap. The scene stretches for multiple paragraphs, exploring moral conflict and the strained faces of people in the gallery. It examines the law as both shield and barrier, and the friction between institutional protection and activist disclosure. Jake then decodes the embedded hash in the certificate and discovers a near-impossible linkage, an internal key used by Oliver's personal assistant,
Claire Dawson, who was terminated 2 years prior. The discovery leads to a tense confrontation in a parking garage smelling of rain and diesel. "I never wanted to hurt the child," Claire says, shaking, the leather of her coat creaking as she hugs herself. "I only wanted the truth hidden because it kept a family whole." Jake listens to the scrape of her shoes and the drip of water from her umbrella. "Why create a certificate?" he asks. She answers, "People need anchors. If Oliver could not be a father in public, then the paper made sense. But someone else manipulated it." These exchanges create a moral complexity around Claire and a human face to the web of secrets. Moment of tension 3 is the unmasking of a corporate insider who sold access to the offshore registrar. The scene reads like a crescendo, with evidence, testimony, and the smell of printer toner mixing with the electricity in the air. The insider's face is pale under interrogation lights. "I thought I was protecting the company," he says, voice flat. The interrogation alternates accusations and contrition. He reveals that pressure came from a figure in investor relations who feared scandal above life. The admission is a blow, each syllable a chisel to the facade. Employees whisper in hallways, the carpeted floors absorbing gossip like a sponge. The narrative moves through several negotiation scenes as Oliver offers to donate anonymously to a research foundation if the matter is contained. The conversation between him and Dr. Maya is tight. "I will underwrite the search for a donor if you agree to confidentiality," Oliver offers, scent of his cologne mixing with the antiseptic of the ward. Maya, protective of her patient, answers, "We need transparency to find a match, not hush money." These scenes demonstrate the friction between philanthropy used as repair and the ethics of obligation. The board is a chorus of whispers about reputation and liability. Moments of tension 4 arrives as a final showdown in an elevator stalled between floors with Anna, Jake, and Oliver inside. The air warm and recycled, the metal cool under the handrails. "If you are Lily's father, tell her yourself," Anna says, voice thin. Oliver's jaw tightens, the scent of his cologne suddenly too sharp. "I can raise the funds and run research," he replies. Jake watches, pulse in his throat, and realizes the decision is not legal but moral. They talk through custody, care, and what it means to be a parent beyond blood. The dialogue runs long, intimate, and full of small details tactile enough to feel like confession. The elevator's fluorescent flicker becomes a cage and also a crucible for truth. The DNA test, conducted with strict chain of custody, arrives with a certified envelope. The lab technician, Sarah Cho, explains the method in a clinical voice. V used PCR amplification across 16, the loci and compared allele frequencies. The statistical probability of paternity is calculated using population genetics models and yields a match statistic that is then ported with confidence intervals. The final document is heavy in technical clarity but light in human language until Dr. Maya reads the result aloud, voice trembling. The probability indicates no paternal match for Oliver. The room smells faintly of toner and coffee. For a moment, the world tilts. There is relief for some and devastation for others that had banked on truth being otherwise. Yet the story is not over. The DNA result opens a new avenue. If Oliver is not Lily's father, who is? Jake, Rachel, and Detective Ortiz follow a trail to an adoption broker who fabricated documents to satisfy a client. The broker, a thin man named Gregory Ames, speaks in a small office that smells of old ink. "People wanted quick answers," he says, wringing his hands. "I made papers look right and people accepted them." The revelation is both sickening and crucial. The certificate was a cover for a chain of convenience that allowed a child to be registered without thorough background checks. The legal ramifications are sharp: fraud, administrative negligence, and potentially criminal negligence. Julia publishes an exposé that reframes the story from scandal to systemic failure. The public shifts from gossip to outrage, demanding changes to registrar practices and better oversight. Moment of tension 5 captures the night before a crucial board vote. Eleanor stares at family photographs and the telephone rings with the persistence of conscience. "We built an empire so that others would not have to suffer," she tells Oliver, but her voice cracks under the weight of controlling an image over a life. Shareholders gather, rumors of replacements swirl, and Elias Trent enters close.
The next day will determine leadership and whether the company will prioritize legal sheltering or systemic reform. The scene lingers on the rustle of paper, the shine of cufflinks, and the cold bite of coffee drunk too fast. Decisions made in the next hours will echo into hospital wards and into the lives of the people who simply wanted a safe child. The legal process moves into civil suits and a criminal inquiry. Marcus bargains to protect employees who cooperated with the truth and to set up a corporate fund for affected families. "We will admit fault where needed," he says, voice flat and legal, and avoid show trials that harm innocent lives. Julia pushes for broader accountability. "This is not only a Hawthorne problem," she tells a roomful of journalists, her voice a bell. "This is an industry problem." The net result is a negotiated settlement, changing registration protocols, and a public commitment to better oversight. The media spotlight shifts from scandal to reform as Hawthorne Global agrees to audit registrars as support legislative change. After months of turmoil, Lilly receives a matched donor from a registry that the company helps to expand. The surgical theater smelled like antiseptic.
And warm metal instruments, the steady beeps of monitors like a heartbeat finding rhythm. Dr. Maya oversees the transplant with the calm of someone who has seen deep fear and deep triumph. A nurse pinches the corner of a sterile drape and smiles at Jake, who stands in the waiting room with Rachel and Anna. "You did this," she says, meaning his dogged search for truth and the chain of choices that created new rules. The transplant goes forward, and the post-op days feel long in a way that world-changing decisions do not always allow. The epilogue begins with 1 month after the crisis, quiet and small. Oliver has stepped back from public duties and agreed to an independent review of family and corporate practices. He visits Lily once, leaving a small wooden toy in the hospital room, smelling faintly of varnish and mint gum. "I am sorry for the confusion and for harm," he tells Naomi, the mother, who hugs her child with the graceless tenderness of someone who was lost and learned. Naomi is wary but pragmatic. She accepts the toy and thanks him without promises. The company has initiated emergency changes in registrar verification and has provided funding for extended HLA research programs. A new foundation, seeded by Hawthorne Global and governed by a board of ethicists and clinicians including Dr. Maya and Anna, begins offering support to families facing bureaucratic failures. The transformation is cautious and imperfect, but it continues. People attend small town hall meetings, the smell of coffee and printer ink and earnest conversation filling community centers as lawyers and doctors explain new protections. The first month settles into a fragile normal that still pulses with unfinished business. 3 months later, the research seeded by the foundation yields a network that increases the probability of matches for rare antigens. Rachel helps design a secure donor registry protocol that encrypts identifiers but also flags suspicious certificates for human review. "We found that automation without checks is prone to abuse," she says at a conference, smelling of recycled air and warm bodies. The legal landscape has shifted, with legislation pending to enforce stricter cross-border registrar standards and penalties for brokers who falsify documents. Oliver has not returned to full power, but works behind the scenes in a role focused on policy change, the smell of his office now less cologne and more stacks of policy drafts. Marcus oversees a compensation fund administered by the foundation, ensuring families get support while details of liability and criminal intent are adjudicated. Lily begins to walk with a sturdy wobble, her laughter echoing like a bell. Communities bring flowers and fresh bread, the ordinary kindness of neighbors becoming the less visible hero of the story. 6 months later, the world has a new rhythm. The foundation has funded pilot studies and funded a hospital wing named for patients like Lily, where registries and donor advocates sit side by side. Jake sits at a small desk, the smell of old coffee and new notebooks, writing a paper on data ethics and registries and how technology must be governed by human accountability. He often visits Lily, now stronger and curious, asking for stories about the servers that saved her life. Eleanor Hawthorne is older in public appearance and quieter, having ceded influence to a more transparent council. She attends a hearing and speaks in measured tones about legacy, admitting that the cost of silence was too high. The company's stock recovers slowly, and Elias Trent's takeover bid dissolves under the weight of reform.
Julia continues to report and now facilitates public forums that feel less like trials and more like classrooms. The world has not been perfected, but has been nudged toward responsibility. The final paragraph of the script draws the threads together, recapitulating the fight and the change. What began with a scanned certificate and a 60-second breakthrough became a story about accountability, about how a single person can challenge 1,000 experts by asking the right question and refusing to stop. It was not merely about legal documents, but about the choice to put a life before a ledger. Allies were unexpected and flawed, opponents human and decisive, and the little girl who once lay under fluorescent lights now runs in a courtyard tended by volunteers and doctors. If you want to keep following stories where improbable choices become public reforms and private courage turns into collective action, subscribe and join a community of people who believe that truth, skill, and compassion can rewrite systems. Thank you for staying with this story.